Network infrastructure is often overlooked in healthcare innovation, and in this episode, recorded live at our recent Winter Summit, with the support of THT Plus partners Extreme Networks, we explore how automation, AI, and secure networks are transforming healthcare. Hopefully, we'll see you at our next virtual summit happening in November of this year to cap off spring. Registration is free, so follow us on LinkedIn so you can find out more. Collaboration starts with a conversation, Team Health Tech. Let's make it happen. In healthcare technology, one component that's often overlooked is the network infrastructure. Today, we'll discuss the importance of a robust, flexible, and secure network that connects all healthcare technologies. You'll learn how automation, quality assurance, and AI are transforming network management and ensuring that advanced healthcare technologies can function effectively. Welcome to Session 5 of the Talking HealthTech Winter Summit 2024 on the critical role of networks in healthcare. This session is brought to you by Extreme Networks. And joining me in the discussion is Alex Swan, Senior Systems Manager at Extreme Networks, and Julanne Saltiel, Head of Services for Australia and New Zealand at Extreme Networks. Prior to this session, we ran a poll on LinkedIn and we asked, what's the most critical aspect of hospital network infrastructure? Over half of respondents, 56%, said security was most important. 19% said flexibility, 15% said quality assurance, and 11% said automation was the most critical aspect of hospital network infrastructure. Let's start the panel and dive in more. We have Julanne, we have Alex together from Extreme Networks. Great to see you both. Thanks so much for joining the session.
Thanks very much, Peter. It's
Thank
great
you.
to be here. Great to be back again.
Excellent. Back again, that's right. And it's good to have you're part of this conversation because, as we were reflecting in the lead up to this, throughout of these sessions that we talk about here at the Talking Health Tech Summits, one thing just you need to have the internet. You need to have connectivity. You need to have a network to be able to power anything that you do. Short of the short of the moldy paper records we talked about in session number 2, but we all want to get rid of those. So in order to do that, this is a critical component, and it's a little bit more than in terms of as I've learned, the needs within healthcare settings are a little bit more complicated than what you might just need in your standard small business or a residential connection side. But which is interesting that healthcare is such a strong focus from the Extreme Networks piece. So actually, I might throw to you first to give a bit more context in terms of, I guess, this landscape of network within the healthcare space and why that's important and why you focus so much of it.
Yeah, you've kind of set the scene perfectly, Peter. I mean, I think the trouble we often have with networks is they are often forgotten about, often the last thing, highly commoditized. The network should just work. And while I agree with that statement, and because ultimately, as we mentioned in your previous session, what we need our systems to do is get out the way to allow clinicians to do their job, which is provide care. And I think I said to you in the last session that we did, in my view, the very best networks are the ones that go completely unnoticed and just allow people to get on and do what they need to do with them. But as you just showed in the poll, what's front of mind for an awful lot of people are things like security, which is particularly important inside a healthcare environment, especially from the network perspective. I mean, we've only got to look back over the last 10 to 15 years to see some of the huge impacts that security vulnerabilities have had to patient care. I certainly was involved in recovery efforts in the UK for several incidents. For us, healthcare environments are probably some of the most complex in network environments that we deal with across any industry. There's a huge diversity of applications. I mean, even if we just take the kind of catch-all term of EMR, again, previous session we mentioned, the EMR is operationally critical to the function of a hospital. We absolutely have to have that. It's not just a nice to have anymore. But if you really break it down, the EMR is is actually lots of different aspects of applications and data coming from different sources, all with different security requirements, all with different perhaps latency and bandwidth requirements in order to operate effectively. So when we kind of look at all of that, the the network is becoming, or requirements upon the network are becoming more and more complex all the time in terms of security, application delivery, performance, just to get to that goal, that vision of having the network get out of the way and just the applications do what they need to do.
Yeah. No, that's right. It's you kind of want it a little bit like the trains, right? Like no one's gonna compliment the New South Wales trains when
Yeah.
they run on time.
Never in my life as a network engineer have I ever had a phone call to say, "Hey, Alex, network's working great." This doesn't happen.
That's make sure that's an action item for everyone after this is to compliment your network person, just to let them know it's working fine. Hey Julanne, I'd love to hear from your side too in terms of some of those. I guess the perspective on the floor, on the ground, before because I want to get into with both of you some of the points that Alex raised about some of those technologies and tools and the requirements of these networks and what those look like from the technical side. But the people, the customers, the I guess requirements as you're engaging with them in your role, like what are you hearing as what's really required on the ground from some of these solutions?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. One of the things that I'm really passionate about, and I think is not talked about often enough, is when a health sector organizations chooses their technology, right? So they've agreed that the networking platform is what they want to see. It's how do you implement and support that, right? Like Alex said, something can be running in the background and we're hoping it running really well. But you've got to be able to implement something like that and allowing the clinicians to do their jobs and allowing us to get in there and do what we're really good at. So from a services perspective, this is what we do with Extreme Networks, right? We bring to the forefront of how do you implement that environment and set it up in such a way that it is seamlessly working and all those apps can deliver the outcome that they need. It's a little bit like, you implement the technology, but it's the ongoing care and support that is required to maintain that network and ensure that if there are any issues or challenges in the environment, those people within the IT department know who to call and know how they're going to get the support.
Yeah, and just to be extending that again, just referring back to some of the previous points from the earlier session, it's important to think about all of this holistically. And I think you probably heard me say before, the way I think about network design now is to have an adaptable platform that can change as application requirements changed on the network over the life of that investment. So you can't just look at a network with a set of requirements now in a hospital environment, put it in, and expect everything to be the same for the next 5, 6, 7 years. We're always going to be onboarding new technologies, application updates, increasing capabilities on the applications that we run on those networks. So thinking holistically, constantly monitoring the performance of all of those different application components, not just gone are the days of being able to run something like an agent on a PC just for monitoring the performance of an application, because actually we're collecting data sources from so many different things now, IoT included, where we don't have the ability to do that. Having tools built into that network infrastructure to monitor the performance of the applications, adapt to it, start to prioritize critical components of applications so that the stability and the performance of our applications from a clinician's perspective is rock solid, stable, giving them what they need to deliver that care immediately.
Yeah. Geez, as you're talking too, I'm thinking, this is the problem with me in live sessions that I think of these dumb things on the fly, but I'm going to say it anyway. There's a Simpsons quote where it's like, when somebody think of the children, I think about with an implementation of a new, even in the first or second session that we ran where it was looking at the remote patient monitoring, within Lod and Mali, and then it was all of these different tools and the IoT devices that you mentioned as well. It's all these great implementations and stuff that we talk about, but it's like, does anyone have like the? I imagine the network piece depends on who we're dealing with. It's kind of like, oh yeah, and then we only really find out at the end that, okay, well, there's actually a lot of stuff that needs to happen in order to make sure the network is like appropriate for what we're doing. What does that actually look like? Is it like how like it sounds like these things are adaptable, but as you say, it's not really a set and forget thing in terms of how are you finding healthcare settings are, I guess, ensuring that that network conversation is kind of front of mind in some of these implementations that we talk about also.
Correct. Yeah, I certainly think that there's a cultural aspect for that many customers do need to consider, and I keep referring back to the previous session that they touched on some really important points, like get engaged with the clinicians early on and keep that engagement between IT and the clinicians going. Because I can't tell you the number of times that I've gone to visit a healthcare customer and I've rocked up to the IT department and they've said, look what just arrived. I've got a box of these 500 things that I've got to put on the network that a particular clinician has purchased without ever consulting the IT team. So we're then kind of scrambling to prepare the network to onboard those safely and securely, rather than just plugging everything in. Now, we'll probably come on to this a bit more later, but that platform idea that I discussed where we have a network as a platform that can adapt to changing requirements, that will help with a lot of that to automate the deployment of devices and services on a network. But we still need to understand the attributes and parameters that we need to configure to ensure the safety, security, and stability and operation of those particular devices. And ultimately, whatever they are, IoT devices, bits of medical devices, any kind of clinical equipment that's now IP connected, you still have to think of them from the application perspective. What are they doing? What data are they generating? Where's it going to? Who needs access to it? What's the risk if that data is affected on the fly and breached somehow? You need to think about all of that stuff prior to dropping things on. So having the adaptable platform is great, but you do need to engage early with clinical stakeholders.
There's another way, and actually I'll jump in there. One of the things that we focus strongly on is the discovery phase in network planning. It's such an important component of understanding the environment, understanding the requirements, and then they can be adapted ongoing. But professional services is a big part of that planning and discovery phase, right? What is it that we need to be delivering? What's the outcome that we need to be delivering as a result of implementing the network and the technology? So part of professional services is we do that discovery, and that can be a number of workshops. Then we do the planning phase, and then we go back and get that validated. Does this meet with the business requirements? Does this meet with the outcomes that you're looking to achieve? And then you do the implementation phase.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, you raised a really important point here as well, because I'm sure a lot of the audience will recognize this as well, that we typically see shrinking IT team sizes and lower budgets as well, and actually, especially if you've got a giant project like deploying an EMR, additional outside help is often required to ensure that things go as smoothly as possible. So having a partner vendor relationship where they have those skills that can support you in the deployment and operation of that technology is also really key.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, as Katrina mentioned in the chat too, it's, raising raising children is like, you need a village to do that. It's pretty similar within the healthcare side when it comes to the implementations. I want to make sure we cover off on some of those technologies because we have skirted out on the outskirts a little bit and dived into them in a bit of detail. But from your side, where are you seeing the most kind of interesting implementations of some technologies that can leverage some of these benefits from, or where the network side can really have an impact? Because we have touched on automation and Internet of Things and
Yeah,
what's getting your attention?
kind of scattergun. There's so much, and but that's just the world that we live in now. It's just so much is now connected. So look, in terms of technology, what I really wanted to just touch on is at least one really core piece of what we do, which is several years ago we thought that. We're looking back over the history of networks. We realized that every time we've hit a scalability limitation, we just layer up a new protocol or a new way to deal with it, or we overlay something else. And we've just been layering up complexity continuously. And when we do that, what happens there is we have a larger attack surface. We are generally more vulnerable from a security perspective. It's much more complex to roll out new services. So the box of 500 devices turns up and I've got to build a new service on the network to cope with them. If I've got all those traditional multiple layers of complexity, it could take me forever to do all the configurations on every single one of those network devices just to securely roll out that service. So we kind of wound it back and we said, perhaps we need to look at this in a completely different way. And if we were building networks from the ground up today, would we do it with that same traditional network stack? And we said, probably not. So we developed something which is now an IEEE standard, able to operate with any other traditionally deployed network, but it works in a fundamentally different way. So we're able to simply connect any one of our network switches in any topology that you can think of. They will self-form one very large fabric. You can then define a virtual service over the top of it. And when data enters that virtual service, it is completely encapsulated and isolated from everything else. So not only will that service have zero visibility of any other service that's traversing the network infrastructure, it also won't have any visibility of the network infrastructure itself. So you're addressing a number of important problems here. One is automation, which I'm surprised was so low in your survey, because actually automation is one of the things that can aid a security perspective, right? So if you want to address security, having automation so that you're reducing the risk of human error in complex configurations is actually really important. So just like I have a great example of this actually of one of our customers here in Sydney, university actually, but they have a teaching hospital on site, and they had a research team that they had no accommodation for in the hospital itself. So they had to place them out on the campus somewhere. Now they needed access to some of the secure clinical services, and the team there were able to deploy that securely across the other side of the campus, going across hundreds of different switches in less than a minute with a couple of lines of configuration. It was just put this service over there on the other side of the campus, and that infrastructure automatically extended that service securely, resiliently throughout the whole network. So that goes back to that thing I said about having a platform that is adaptable. So yes, you're addressing automation, you're addressing security, but you're also having that flexibility to continually adapt to changing requirements. And if you overlay that with the tools to monitor the application performance and prioritize applications and back it up with the right services, I think you're on the right lines to having a very solid platform that will underpin a lot of these larger projects for deployment of clinical applications.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's great to hear those kind of real world examples and how these can really have an impact. I can see here in the chat too, there's a few attendees reflecting on their own experiences and how some of these things can be neglected and the impact it has, and how you do, I think there's some consulting going on amongst the chat generally on how best to manage these things. So that's really cool. Exciting to hear about some of these technologies as you suggest too. And yeah, I agree. The automation side, there's a lot that can be done there that, I guess in that flash poll probably didn't come through, but I know is pretty critical across those that really need to do the doing. When I look at the kind of future facing stuff and some of the where the future lies in this area around networks. I mean, it's as you suggested before. There's it's not a set and forget thing, and there's always things that are kind of evolving. But where are you seeing some of the whether it's the technological innovations coming through that can make things even more efficient or powerful from the clinic side, or also what customers are asking for and what they need and their kind of awareness in this space?
All right. Can I jump
Yep.
in? I
Yeah.
saw a comment there, and I'd love to address it, and about how you maintain that network, right? And it was about there was a problem in the network, and they hadn't realized that 7 years down the track, no one had done any upgrades.
Wow.
And
That's a huge security risk.
well, it is. It's a
Yeah.
huge security risk, but it's also, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is the fact that we maintain a network and we proactively engage in, if there is a global bug fix that needs to be implemented, then we will build a strategy with you to how we implement or get that out. If there is a security patch based on the different dynamics of the security issues, we will work with you on a regular basis to make sure that that is rolled out in a way that has zero impact, right? So we manage and plan that with you through our services organization. Through that premier service, we're giving you that subject matter expertise to help manage.
Yeah, it's about supplementing
Yeah.
the customer's teams, isn't it? So aiding with that and just
They become
proactively
part of the team.
looking at all of the vulnerabilities that come through. What do our customers have deployed? Which features are they using? Are they affected? Making them aware, helping them with a plan to address it if we find them. And look, it's if, and I think it's more a case of when. I think we all know there are vulnerabilities. Nobody's perfect. It's how you adapt to them and address them rapidly that's really, really important. But to your point, Peter, though, I'm also thinking I was hoping we'd get through all of this without mentioning the dreaded two letters, AI. But it is the front of everybody's mind, and there are a huge number of tools now that are incorporating elements of that, and it is changing the way that we interact with a lot of these systems. And I think for a lot of organizations, we need to be thinking perhaps about the next generation that's coming through, because like as Extreme Networks, we can find it really difficult to find highly skilled network engineers. And I'm sure our customers have some of the same challenges. Like perhaps some of the workforce has moved into other more interesting spaces, around software. And I think there will always be good network engineers, of course, but we have to think about how the next generation are going to interact with the tool set that they use to operationally manage these things. It reminds me of years back, we did when I was working with a systems integrator back in the UK. It was a study about the change in the way that the next generation, the millennials, actually behaved. And University of Loughborough did a study, and they found a marked difference in age groups when you asked people to press a doorbell. And if you were under a certain age, instead of going with the index finger, you might go with the thumb. And they hypothesized that this is perhaps because of games consoles, touch screens, and it's kind of physically changing the behavior. And I think where we've perhaps got to now is less about physical interaction with stuff, but it's more about how we engage with data and applications. And any company or like ourselves that's not really thinking about that next generation, I do think will get left behind, and making sure that we've got the right tool sets that operate in a way that the next generation expect to interact with them.
Yeah. No, I'm still thinking about that's a really good analogy about the doorbell thing, about how the physical change. It's like when I ask my kids to pretend to be on the phone, and anyone around my age and over will go like this, but then anyone around the speakerphone will like this. But to that point, like how we interacted is changing significantly, and I think that's come through in quite a few of these sessions, which is like I don't think anyone's role is going to disappear completely, whether it be from the clinical coding side that we talked about before, or the clinicians that often, they say, well, the robots are going to take over the doctor's role. Of course, it's not going to take it over, but the way that we interact with some of these technologies will change significantly with AI. We're allowed to say AI, by the way. It usually increases search traffic, so that's fine. But but it is important, and it's part of everyone's conversation, because it's quite significant and change. One thing I do want to make sure you've touched on already in terms of vulnerabilities and cyber, but I know whenever these conversations come up around network and connectivity and all of that, it is important that we touch on, these challenges. And I guess if I was to reflect on, I think a lot of the cyber incidents that occur generally within healthcare have nothing to do with the network. It's more so a user side of perhaps clicking on a nefarious link or following the incorrect instructions. But at times there's challenges around network. How are you keeping across I guess all the requirements when all of these cool technologies that we have, the good guys, also the bad guys have access to, and probably some others as well. So it's difficult to keep up.
They'll always be one step ahead.
Mm.
There's more money to be made in doing bad stuff than there is good, I think. Sadly, from when you're discovering vulnerabilities. But security can never be an absolute thing. You can never be 100% secure. But if it's all about risk mitigation. So, like I mentioned, some of the capabilities with the wide networking infrastructure that we have to encapsulate those services so that there isn't any visibility. That's one risk mitigation technique. Automation, so the deployment of devices as well. So if I've got IoT devices and I say I can identify what device type that is, I know that's a temperature sensor for HVAC controls or whatever. So I know actually that only needs to do a couple of things on the network. It only needs very basic network services and probably one or two application ports over. So when we put it on the network, only allow it to do those things. So if somebody does breach it or somehow gains access to the network masquerading as one of those things, what they can do is incredibly limited. So there's a lot of tools and features and capabilities that we can use today to do that. But I think leveraging particularly AI tools in the future to monitor behaviors to try and determine whether it's a genuine, legitimate activity is also going to be something that is really important. And we've talked about AI a little, but everybody's looking to put AI into their products now. But I think we need to again think more holistically about this and how do we use those kind of tools for evaluating the data in the tools that we've got, but also access to vulnerability notices or other bits of configuration documentation that's available from Extreme anyway. We need to think about these things holistically.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great summary, and I'd love to learn more about where you're kind of looking at the future, and I'm sure we'll have another conversation soon on the podcast as well. But we're going to have to leave it there because that's our rapid fire format for the summit. So Alex, Julanne, I really appreciate you making the time and look forward to chatting again soon.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to be on.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Talking Health Tech. Make sure you like and subscribe and share this episode with someone who might find it valuable. For more information and resources about healthcare innovation, visit talkinghealthtech.com.